And so part of what brought me here today has been a long journey, and there has been a lot of ups and downs along the way. I must have, man, it's been so long since I can remember my first class in seminary, but I'll tell you what, by the time I was finished, I was just ready to just run out of the classroom because I had had enough of all of the book learning, and I really wanted to get into a church and to share the word of the Lord with a vibrant, lifeful congregation. And so I just want to thank you for having me. And I will say this, when I began my journey, when I felt that I was being called into ministry, when I showed up to my first class in seminary, I made it a mission, more of a decision really, not to take my faith for granted. I did not want to accept Christianity because it was the faith of my parents, or because somebody said that it was really cool, that Jesus is awesome. But I wanted to accept Christianity on its own merits because I believed it was true. And so today, my sermon is why I believe Christianity is true. And I hope that you can get something out of this. As we've gone through Advent, we've seen the preparation that the Lord has done to reveal Christ to the world. And so I think now that we've had this revelation of Christ that we've celebrated on Christmas, I had this feeling of, well, now what and so what? And so hopefully this sermon can be an expression of how you might articulate your faith in a world that so desperately needs Christ. And the reality is, 1 Peter 3:15 says that we should always have a ready defense and a reason for the hope within. So consider this my reason. I like to start off by asking a simple question. What kind of world do you want to live in? I believe that how we answer this question will reveal a lot about the ideas and values that we hold dear. As human beings, we are constantly wrestling with various ideas and the implications they hold. After all, some ideas can lead people to death and destruction, while others can lead people to life and prosperity. And so we have to take ideas very seriously. A favorite philosopher of mine who I got this view from is Mortimer Adler. Time magazine once described him as America's philosopher for the everyman because he had a way of communicating complex ideas in a down-to-earth manner. And a good portion of his writing dealt with the question of God's existence. For Adler, the God question was the most important investigation in life. He said, more consequences for thought and action follow the affirmation or denial of God than from answering any other basic question. It's clear then that we need to consider the existence of God as part of our worldview, as how we answer that question of what kind of world do we want to live in. And so I'd like to start with the negative. Let's start with contemplating a world without God. In 1882, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world had yet owned has bled to death under our knives." Very grim. Who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to cleanse ourselves? What festival of atonement? What sacred game shall we have to invent? Nietzsche was a very serious atheist. He actually contended with the idea that the world did not have God. And truth be told, even as an avowed atheist in that way, Nietzsche lamented the death of God. He saw a world without God being utterly nihilistic, devoid of any objective meaning, value, and purpose. Nietzsche predicted that this nihilism would manifest itself in very serious ways. and would lead to conflicts unlike the world had seen. His predictions would come true in the 20th century. The bloodiest wars in human history have all been ideological conflicts against Nazism, fascism, communism, just to name a few, all of which had a nihilistic core. After World War II, civilization vowed never again to let something like that happen. The United Nations formed, and at the center of this organization was a powerful document called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which many historians consider to be one of the crowning achievements of mankind. That's good old Eleanor right there, doing her grandma. Oh, look at this. Well, the first article is this. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Okay, it's a rather lovely statement, but to be honest with you, I find it very presumptive. Nowhere in that declaration is a defense of where these rights come from. They're just assumed. Honestly, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Kind of depends on where you're born, right? Well, says who? I mean, every parent has used a line like this before, because I said so. And that's kind of what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is saying. It's all human beings are born free and equal because we said so. And you know what? It's a great argument. And as a parent myself, I'm bound to use this line at some point when my son is old enough to understand it. And it's a very compelling argument to make because the parent is in a natural position of authority over their child. They can say so. But when it comes to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it just amounts to an argument from a majority. It doesn't work like that. I mean, imagine if all of us went to the grocery store after this, and we left here and we showed up, just a big crowd, and we said, "Hey there, Mr. Manager, we the people do hereby declare that we were born with the inalienable right to shop for free." I mean, how do you think that would go over? What if the manager said, "No, you have to pay the price like everybody else"? What the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is saying is, well, we have this document and it says because we said so. So we can shop for free because we said so. I'm not buying it. The reason for that is the buck has to stop somewhere. And anything written by men can be unwritten by men. Even Thomas Jefferson knew this. Even as some might say an atheist himself, although he's more of a deist, not very Christian, he wasn't a Christian by any stretch. He knew this when he was writing the Declaration of Independence. He knew that the only way to justify the revolution was to go over King George's head in terms of authority. He couldn't say, because we the people said so. He had to say, because God said so, because the Creator endowed us with inalienable rights. Not, we took a vote. So that, to me, is powerful evidence that we have this sense of meaning in our lives that has to come from someplace else. We can't simply say, because I said so, when it comes to the important things in life, if we want to ground them in any meaningful way. And the reality is, some people might say, well, how about science? And okay, well, science cannot come to your rescue here either. You can't use science to prove human rights. We spent decades looking into the night sky with our space telescopes and smashing accelerated particles. And for all we've been able to discover, we're left with more questions. Scientists have yet to solve the big questions. What is the meaning of life? Why are we here? Worse, science has given us every indication that the universe could get quite happily along without us. And they've yet to even solve the basic impetus or enterprise of science itself. The late, great Stephen Hawking pointed out this issue. He said, even if there is only one possible unified theory, it is just a set of rules and equations. What is it that breathes fire into the equations and makes a universe for them to describe? The usual approach of science, of constructing a mathematical model, cannot answer the questions of why there should be a universe for the model to describe. Why does the universe go all the bother of existing? It's clear that reality itself has given us a lot of room for interpretation. And in that space, in that room for interpretation, you can believe that the material world is absolute, or you can believe that something transcends it, that there is a creator that endows us, that we can call upon the name of the Lord, that we can accept the existence of God, instead of just saying, because I said so. If you've seen the Marvel movie Doctor Strange, you'll remember this scene where before he acquires his powers, he expresses deep skepticism over transcendent things. He accepts kind of that materialist scientific outlook on life. Another character called the Ancient One calls him out. She says this, "You're a man looking at the world through a keyhole. You've spent your whole life trying to widen that keyhole, to see more, to know more. And now, on hearing that it can be widened in ways you can't imagine, you reject the possibility." And Dr. Strange says this, "No, I reject it because I do not believe in fairy tales about chakras or energy or the power of belief. There is no such thing as spirit. We are made of matter and nothing more. You're just another tiny, momentary speck in an indifferent universe." Now, in a world without God, that is a perfectly legitimate statement to make. But this idea that the material world is absolute is something I find unbelievable. Belief is powerful. The ability to sit down and think about your future and what kind of person you'd like to become is one of the most powerful things that you can do in life. Having that opportunity to just take a moment to be introspective, just on simple things. And our beliefs are all at the center of it. How we think about ourselves, how we think about the time we're spending, how we think about what we're supposed to do that day. All of that is a function of belief. So I fundamentally disagree with Dr. Strange when he says he doesn't believe in the power of belief. I think he himself is making a loaded statement when he was rejecting the Ancient One in that movie. And so if you wish to be like him before he was transformed, and you wish to live in a world without God, without objective meaning, value, and purpose for every human life, without a way to ground human rights, then so be it. But if you do want to have all those things, if you want to be able to say, you know what, I do find things objectively meaningful, valuable, purposeful, I do believe in human rights, then, friends, you have to take the leap of faith to believe in God. You have to take the second step in the 12-step program. You have to come to believe in a power greater than yourselves. Because without this higher power, you must give the world over to nihilism, to chaos, and to the whims of tyrants. A world where nothing is objectively meaningful, where only the strong survive and only the affluent are blessed. So here's the dude. I don't know if y'all have seen this movie, The Big Lebowski, but I can appreciate this response because this guy's like, okay, so what about God? Why can't I just live my life and do me and just be about myself? all this God talk that you're going on about, that's just, well, like your opinion, man. But the thing is, nihilism and chaos is nothing to be cavalier about. My opinion here isn't about which political candidate is worth voting for or which domestic or foreign policy is worth pursuing. Rather, I'm talking about the fate of the universe itself, the fate of the world, the fate of our own lives. Taking the leap of faith to live as though God exists doesn't have to be that hard. You don't have to compromise your intellectual security either. It honestly comes down to one thing. It comes down to making a positive response to the question I led with. What kind of world do you want to live in? Well, if you want to live in a world that promotes human flourishing, then you have to take an active role in bringing that world about. You have to live as though God exists. You have to commit to a way of life that opposes the ways of the world. You have to commit to an objective sense of goodness and justice. You have to commit to those things. And here's another response. So what, some might say? It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. You can't prove God with science, so why should I go on and bother living as though God exists? Well, okay, I'll tell you what. When you stop trying to prove it and start trying to live it, you'll find out. You'll find out what it means to have God in your life. And as soon as you take that leap of faith, you'll begin to see the world and your place in it in a brand new way. When God is at the center of your life, everything else will fall into place. God provides that center of gravity that everything can revolve around. Everything will get rearranged, and you'll begin to see the world the way it is supposed to be seen. And what's my evidence for this? I think one of the first things you'll notice is that once you've taken that leap of faith, it'll seem like the world has gone wrong, that something is wrong with the world, that things are going the way that they're not supposed to be going. Just watch the news and you can see that. You'll begin to see the injustice, the disorder, and the evil. These things will begin to frustrate you. Buddhism has a great word for this. It's called dukkha, and it's often translated to suffering, but a closer definition that I found means a dissatisfaction with the world. I think after you take that leap of faith, you'll become dissatisfied with the world because you'll begin to see it how God sees it. You'll also begin to see yourself how God sees you. You might notice that there are some things that you need to work on in your personal life, that everything isn't coming up roses. You'll probably wind up taking a cold, hard look in the mirror one day, and you might be inclined to take another step from the 12-step program called a fearless moral inventory. I call it an introspective look at the contents of your character, but at the very least, we have to come to recognize that we're not perfect, that we've let other people down. We've run red lights on the way here. We've bought products from companies with overseas manufacturing that don't pay the people fair wages, or at least the wages that we would expect to receive. We've bought food from companies that treat animals with disrespect, so on and so forth. And some of you might be saying, okay, well, what does that matter? No harm, no foul, right? It's not like I've sold drugs or killed anybody. Well, in Christianity, there is a word for this imperfection and tension in our lives and in our character. And a reason why we're really good at compartmentalizing and rationalizing our ethics is because of sin. And I think it's an undeniable aspect of the human condition. I think the Apostle Paul has one of the best insights into exactly what sin looks like. This is from Romans 7. I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Now, if I do what I do not want, I agree that the law is good. But in fact, that it is no longer that I do it, but sin that dwells within me. For I know that nothing good dwells within me, that is, in my flesh. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I that does it, but the sin that dwells within me. Paul is somebody who took an inventory of their character, and that passage from Romans is just a beautiful expression of that inner conflict, the inner battle that's in our lives. He hates the fact that he couldn't do the good that he knows he should be doing. And if you've felt the same way, then congratulations. Like me, you're a sinner. And I think we need to recognize that. We need to recognize that we are sinners before God, that we have this tension in our life that we need to overcome, that we have a dissatisfaction with the world that we need to overcome. So the next question is, well, what are we going to do about it? Should we just keep pushing the stone uphill? Because it seems to me that we can't figure out how to save ourselves. This isn't something that you can just grab a cup of coffee over with a friend and just hash things out about how you want to fix your life and fix the world. We need something to save us. And I think even those who are who are not religious will admit this. In the first chapter of his book, Pale Blue Dot, Dr. Carl Sagan, a famous science popularizer who you might remember from the Cosmos show back in the 70s, seems to acknowledge this fact. He says, our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity and all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. Carl Sagan was not a religious man, and this is a wonderful admission of just our helplessness and hopelessness against this struggle called sin. And as I've already pointed out, there's no hope to be found in science because the scientific method isn't designed to save us from sin. Okay, so science is off the table. How about religion? Let's give religion a shot, right? Well, if you're a fan of the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment, then the answer is no, to be honest. The Reformation taught us that religion can be hijacked by politics, and people who saw the church as a form of social control called the church out on it. And the Enlightenment taught us that some religious ideas have no place in rational conversation, that they're more superstitious than supernatural. And certainly, in a post-9/11 world, we've definitely seen how dangerous religion can be. So suppose then that we adopt the spirit of the Enlightenment thinkers and promote reason itself as that which can save us. Well, you might be inspired by good old Benny here, $100 bill. Well, when he was 20, he made the following commitment. I conceived the bold and arduous project of arriving at moral perfection. I wished to live without committing any fault at any time. I would conquer all that either natural inclination, custom, or company might lead me into. Spoken like a true 20-year-old. And so he developed this little spreadsheet here where he had 13 virtues, and arranged at the top were the days of the week, and he would try to live out the virtues every day. And the ones that he couldn't make the mark, or he failed at living out, he put a little dot. And as you might expect, he didn't get to his goal. He basically gave himself a gold star for effort because he said that he was better and happier for doing this, but he fell far short of arriving at moral perfection. Even with a fairly rational system like that, you might think he might have had a little bit more success. But I think we shouldn't be too hard on him. So maybe we can just move on and try something else. Maybe let's try, let's look at another example of reason. And I think one example is the League of Nations. After World War I, it was formed with the intent that international conflicts could be prevented peacefully just by hashing it out as opposed to going to war. And it was a great idea, but the problem was that a bunch of countries didn't like it. They took a pass and they never joined. And the League was also reluctant to enforce any of its own mandates, because Britain and France were unsurprisingly on a pacifist streak after the horrors of the Great War. And so in due course, we know what happened next. Reasonable diplomacy failed to prevent World War II. Rationalism just collapsed in the face of Nazis. And things haven't really changed since then. There's just some people that you can't reason with. And so we've come full circle. I think we've come to realize that science can't save us, religion can't save us, reason can't save us. So what can? When I was in high school, there was a really popular punk band called Sum 41 that you couldn't not listen to. They had this song called Fat Lip that was everywhere. But in 2004, they released this album called Chuck, and they had the lyrics to the song of No Reason that I felt are really poignant. Here they are. It's, "Tell me, why can't you see it's not the way? When we all fall down, it won't be too late. Why is there no reason we can't change? When we all fall down, who will take the blame? Will it take?" So, what if I told you that it's not something that can save us, but someone? Someone who could take the blame. Who could this person be? I believe such a hint can be found in Plato's Republic, of all places. In this anthology, he recounts a number of dialogues between Socrates and some students over the meaning of justice. They hit some roadblocks early on, but in the second book, they think they've made some progress. It's here where they compare the differences between a just man and an unjust man, and they come up with this idea of what a perfectly just man would be and do. And this is what they say about him. Say, "Though he has done no wrong, he must have the reputation of the greatest injustice, so that he may be put to the test. But let him stay his course, unchangeable even unto death. Such being his disposition, the just man will have to endure the lash, the rack, the chains, the branding iron, and finally, after experiencing extreme suffering, he will be crucified." You might be taken aback by that prophecy almost. Plato and Socrates talking about a just man being crucified. It's almost biblical. Okay, how about one more hint? Let's take a look at Isaiah 53. "He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. This person that Isaiah spoke of is referred to as the suffering servant in the scriptures. He's throughout Isaiah's writings. And he bears a remarkable resemblance to Plato's man of justice, don't you think? So much so that I think they're actually conceptualizing the same person, this just man who is going to be punished just for doing the right thing. And in the course of human history, I believe that such a person has come, that this person actually existed. And there's no other person who has come close to do what he has been able to do in terms of changing the world. Let's read Philippians. Who being in the form of God did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of a cross. Therefore, God has also highly exalted him and has given him the name which is, which has given him the name of every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, of those in heaven and on earth and of those under the earth, that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. That person is Jesus. He's the same person that Isaiah prophesied, the same person that Plato is talking about. And we read the scriptures, and we're presented with this idea of a person who can come to save us. And honestly, when everything else has failed, when science, religion, and reason have failed us, we should have every reason to come running to this person to help us. You might find the Bible ridiculous. I mean, Mark Twain once said that it's no wonder that truth is stranger than fiction, because fiction has to make sense. And I think this is a great perspective to have about the Bible, because sometimes I read it and I'm like, really? There's a talking donkey and all this and that? It's so absurd that I'm like, well, maybe it's true. And when you get to the points in the Bible where it's about Jesus, you might be confronted with some inconvenient truths that seem fictional and don't make sense, that you might find bothersome even on some level or another, that it might offend your intellectual security, it might offend your scientific disposition. But if there really is a God, and Jesus really was Plato's man of justice and Isaiah's suffering servant, then you have to take the stories about Jesus very seriously. If you do, then I believe you'll encounter a Jesus that frustrates, if not outright defies, any scientific, religious, or reasonable understanding of the man. A true Jesus will emerge out of the biblical text that can challenge your way of life, that can challenge the way of the world. A Jesus of the ages that has withstood the test of time and criticism. Someone who is more than a mere man. And C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said, "A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come away with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us." So you might be taken aback by this, and you might be wondering why God's strategy for saving the world was invested into a person and not some systematic method. You might be wondering why it had to involve a manger and a cross. But the truth is, until we accept the sacrifice of God's Son, we will be sacrificing our own sons on the battlefields and the marketplace. Pray with me. Heavenly Father, through this Advent season, we've been shown your face. We've been shown your face in the form of a little baby who would one day grow up and teach us about you in a powerful new way, Lord God. And Lord, I want to ask you to just put on everyone's heart here today just a renewed understanding of your Son, that you could clear away any doubt of who he is, that you could clear everything away that's in all of our lives so that we can put Jesus at the center of it. Lord, help us make ourselves new in you. Amen.